being recorded on YouTube. So we're delighted to let you know that you can, I'll send you a link, Chris. You can send it to everybody else. They can share it with everybody, this exact recording.
All right. Sounds good to me.
And we'll start our screen share now, present to everybody. And here we go. We're going to be looking at pardon me, today I have a cold, so we're going to be doing our best. But I've been an architect 28 years and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth for the last 10 years. When I became aware that we've not been told the whole truth about what happened on 9/11. And I was just shocked to learn, for instance, that there was a third tower called World Trade Center Building 7. And that's what we're going to be presenting to you today. And we have the opportunity then to look at the Twin Towers as well. What happened to them, how they came down, what the official story is, and what we've not been told. Well, so today we're going to look at an overview of this third tower, and we're going to be using the scientific method, looking for the evidence of explosions and explosive destructions, NIST's theory of normal office fires, the pyroclastic flows, which will explain, and the foreknowledge of this building's destruction, and we'll be looking at some expert opinions. But just regarding myself, I've worked as an architect on many different types of construction, including these $3 and $10 million gymnasiums in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also the $125 million construction observation for $100 million construction project of this new high school, for which I had the construction observation responsibility. And more recently, though, working on this $400 million project with 2 mid-rise offices and 6 blocks of retail, altogether about 1,200 tons of fireproof steel framing. It's now built. This was during its construction. But I'm joined in this effort by about 2,500 architects and engineers who are demanding a new investigation of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers based on the evidence that you're going to hear today and have the opportunity to follow up on, as Chris will mention, in the coming couple of months. But we do have a website, and this is this is it. It's AE911truth.org, and you'll see lots of the evidence, frequently asked questions, et cetera, on the website, because we're going to go pretty quickly through the information, starting with 9/11 itself. I mean, why are we looking at this this issue? Well, a lot of things happened as a result of 9/11. We've invaded 2 countries in which over 1 million people have perished. We're instituting a $4.5 trillion global war on terror, the loss of our civil liberties through the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the 2012 Defense Authorization Act, National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, in which altogether we've basically given up some really core foundation of our liberties. Any of us can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can be disappeared. We can be tortured. We can be even assassinated. And as American citizens, this is now, they say, legal. So if there's any question about what happened on 9/11, given all that's ensuing, shouldn't we devote ourselves to finding out the unanswered questions about it, particularly given the range of other issues that are kind of beyond the scope of our discovery today? Institution of Homeland Security, torture policy, a police state really is what we're looking at, where our government is illegally spying on us. And people aren't saying much about this. The mainstream media is not covering this at all. Well, nor are they using the scientific method with regard to their analysis of the destruction of these three towers, but we are today. And in the West, we've had 100 years of history of this using the scientific method. We formulate a question. How did the towers come down? That's our question. We do some background research, we make some observations, and we construct our hypothesis. It's our best guess. How have other towers come down? Well, we test those hypotheses with experiments. We analyze the results and we draw conclusions. If the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results in an open, transparent manner for all to build upon the body of our work. That's the purpose of the scientific method. It's objective. We're not focusing on any one hypothesis. We're laying them all out objectively because we don't have a personal axe to grind. We are acting as scientists, if you will. Even investigative journalists, architects, anybody who's looking at this material should have an open mind about it with respect to the evidence. And that's proving to be very difficult with regard to 9/11 because we were exposed to shock and awe, terror, which put us in an infantile state on 9/11. And because we've never been attacked before. This is unprecedented on the mainland. And we didn't know what was going on when the next plane was coming in. Back then, 15 years ago almost now, we were looking for answers to get out of this extremely uncomfortable state. I mean, people were dying. So we're quite quick to latch on to answers that come, which came very quickly from our government. Okay, here's your 19 fundamentalist Muslim hijackers. They did this because they hate our freedoms and so forth and so forth. Are we going to just buy that? Well, we did as a country, largely. And I did for 4 years until I heard on the radio David Ray Griffin one day. He was being interviewed in Berkeley, California, and I was listening to the station. I was just shocked. It's the first time I'd ever heard any alternative theory as to how these towers came down. I just had to pull my car over and listen to the rest of this interview. And boy, did I learn something. I said, this guy's either completely fabricating and lying about all this stuff. He had to be, because I would have heard it on the media if this were true. But I didn't hear it on the media, and I did go and research it, and I did find out that it was true, and I did take it to the 15 architects that I worked with at the time, most of which thought I was nuts for the few months before I developed this PowerPoint presentation in its early form. And I bought them pizza. I made them come into the conference room and sit and watch it. And afterward, every one of them agreed with me. Oh my God, you're right. These are controlled demolitions. And that's our thesis today. That's the hypothesis we're going to be looking at. And something has to be done. We need a new investigation. So those were my first 15 signers. And so we're going to apply the data, the scientific method, by gathering data. For instance, let's find out how other buildings have come down due to all different kinds of causes. In this case, fire. Fire is an organic process. It burns through a building every 20 minutes or so in a given area, and then it looks for new fuel sources. And so we've never had a steel frames skyscraper collapse or any skyscraper collapse due to fire. But say in a wood frame building, if it's going to collapse because it's organic, natural, it's destructive force moving through the building, it's going to fall over in gradual waves of destructive collapsing, not straight down all at once through the path of greatest resistance. But we'll come back and look at steel buildings some more. But in terms of the fires in skyscrapers, this one burned 3.5 hours over 5 floors in Los Angeles, and in Philadelphia, 18 hours over 8 floors. In Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. And not one of these skyscrapers came down. Now, this is some really important background research that we didn't have adequately done by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people. And so let's keep this in mind. Now, when buildings do fall over due to natural causes, in these cases, earthquakes, we have a building that's recognizable afterward. Its structure is not completely dismembered. Its concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. So keep this in mind too, because we're going to kind of compare what happened at the World Trade Center to which we're told is a natural collapse started by fire. Okay, so these buildings, though, were blown up. We have thick, billowing, enormous, pyroclastic-like clouds of pulverized concrete and other building solids with this thick, defined edge, which is expanding with these cauliflower-shaped plumes that are expanding as a result of the incredible chemical reactions going on from the explosives. We have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. So if we have these features, we know we have explosions. So we're kind of comparing what a fire might do to a building to what explosions do. With that in mind, we know that explosions can be used and set in buildings to bring them down in a more controlled manner. This is called controlled demolition. We place thousands of explosives throughout the building and then set them off in a very precise order, synchronistically timed floor by floor, resulting in a path of symmetry down to the bottom, resulting in a free fall collapse, usually, or several times. This is a feat that only a handful of controlled demolition companies in the world can even do. So if we have these features, which are associated with controlled demolition, we know we have a controlled demolition. What are they? Well, we have a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure, a straight down symmetrical collapse into its own footprint, because demolition waves remove the column supports. This results in a free fall speed or acceleration straight down through the path of greatest resistance, the thousands of tons of structural steel in the building. We have the total dismemberment of the steel structure is broken up and ready for loading and shipment. Minimal damage to adjacent structures. That's one of the ideas, right? Sounds of explosions heard by witnesses, flashes of light seen by them, enormous clouds of pulverized concrete and pyroclastic-like heat in these clouds from the intense explosions. And we have squibs or isolated explosive ejections occurring at various points in the building. And then chemical evidence of cutter charges left behind in the residue.
Mr. Gage, I think you turned your sound off. I don't know if you can hear us.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, now we have you.
Now we got you.
Oh, sorry about that. So my point there was I was sneezing and I had to go on mute, and I didn't come off mute. But my point was, we have direct evidence of explosive destruction here, and because fire can't create any one of these 10, let alone all of them. So with additional corroborative evidence like government documentation sometimes can be very helpful. I mean, we don't just take down a building in an afternoon like controlled demolition. It takes months of planning and execution. So people know about it. So we have experts agreeing, at least those experts that don't have $100,000 contracts with the federal government that might be risked by telling the truth about what happened to these buildings on 9/11, but say objective experts, which we'll be looking at a couple of them. Foreknowledge. So we know these are happening way in advance. So there's people that know about it or talking about it. With the video documentation, this is all proof of controlled demolition. So with this in mind, knowing the features of a controlled demolition, let's apply them to this third tower. Now, I'd like to ask how many of you in the audience today are relatively unfamiliar with this third tower like I was about 10 years ago when I got started. Could you raise your hand real high so Chris can count you if you're unfamiliar with this third tower? And Chris, let me know what that number is.
It looks like seven or eight.
And how many people in the audience total today?
About 45.
So most people, well, let's reverse it. How many of you guys are familiar with this third tower that came down?
So that's most of the hands in the room are up now.
Wow. Okay, just testing you guys. I want to make sure we're on the level here. That's great. Most people in this country are unfamiliar. So this is a very, very aware audience. This was a 47-story skyscraper, about a football field in length away from the North Tower. And it'd be the tallest building in most of our states. I'm guessing it's taller than anything in Willoughby. Probably Cleveland as well. It was not hit by an airplane. So it's a very important case for us to look at because we don't have jet fuel, we don't have jet plane impacts. And it did go down in the afternoon, about 5:20 in the afternoon. Here it is again, about a football field in length away from the North Tower. They went down at 8:04, well, about 7 hours earlier. And here you can see Building 7 surviving the collapse of the Twin Towers nearby. And it did have a little bit of damage, but NIST says that this was an insignificant factor in the building's collapse. So the Twin Towers going down was not a cause, and diesel fuel in the building was not a cause. Well, what was the cause of this building's collapse about 7 hours later at 5:20 in the afternoon? Well, we'll take a look. But what we're going to be looking at as we do is are there any of the features of controlled demolition? Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure? Well, let's listen to Daryl, a medical worker on site on that day, and see what his experience was.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. Then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that. And
so they heard this sound of a shockwave ripping through the building, windows busting out. After that, then we saw the building crash all the way down to the ground. Well, let's see what it looks like for our first view, some of us, of this third tower that came down, narrated by CBS's Dan Rather.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Well, that's very important. Thank you, Dan, for that perspective. Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. Well, that's what it kind of looks like. We've all seen the old hotels in Las Vegas as they've gone down on TV here and there. It's a fascinating process to watch, and it looks exactly like what we just saw. Very interesting. Well, is it straight down? Is it symmetrical? Is it collapsing into its own footprint? Let's see here as we look from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. Watch the upper penthouse as it collapses a half a second prior to the global collapse, indicating the simultaneous failure of all 24 core columns grouped around the elevator shafts underneath this penthouse. That's very important because it directly contradicts NIST's theory, which we'll be coming to. Wow. Well, I'm not quite convinced yet. Let's put building 7 on the left, a known controlled demolition on the right. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Since it looks exactly like these controlled demolitions, and especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, according to NIST, has never brought down a skyscraper, ever. And yet fire is the only hypothesis that was seriously examined by NIST. Does that make sense to anybody? We don't think so. And we're talking about these fires that are few, small, and scattered throughout the building. These are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in the buildings. And these are the fires that are on the 12th floor, where NIST says the initiation of collapse occurred. And they're burning about 2:30 or 3 o'clock, but we'll take a look at those fires in a little more detail. How do we get a building to collapse symmetrically into its own footprint? Well, we have to remove all 80 columns. I think there's 82 at once, virtually. And you saw the core columns, which are this 24 in the middle here, go down underneath. You saw the penthouse go down over these columns a half a second prior to then the perimeter coming down all at once. Any deviation or imprecision in this, the building will begin to tip over. This is why not more than a half a dozen companies in this country can even bring these buildings down. It's really quite an art. So does fire have that level of precision? And particularly those fires that you just saw? Very important question for all Americans, as we'll see. How fast is this building coming down? Well, we can see the building gaining downward distance with each second. That indicates acceleration, and it actually fits the free fall curve of constant acceleration, 9.1 meters per second squared, almost exactly. It's as if 8 stories were removed from this building all at once, allowing it then to fall straight down and symmetrically. But what about the dismemberment of the steel structure? Is it? Well, yes. We had a 47-story moment-resisting steel frame building where the columns and beams are very rigidly welded together to provide that lateral resistance that you need to resist a hurricane, for instance. It falls down like a house of cards, one beam from a column, completely severed. So 47 stories down to 4, 5, 6 stories tall. What happened to all of that structure? Remember, buildings that fall naturally, we see a building at the bottom of this pile. Do we have sounds of explosions that are heard by witnesses? Well, let's listen to Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, relate his experience.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds, you heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was a boom, like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
And from this gentleman.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
Well, I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
This is very helpful information. And Barry Jennings, who was up on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center 7 after everybody else had been evacuated, because after the planes hit the Twin Towers, people were evacuated, but I guess he didn't know about it. He and the attorney for Mayor Giuliani were going up to their office. They're trying to figure out what happened. They're walking up the stairs, and this is what they experienced.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. The side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom, like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, police officer comes to me and says, "You have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run."
Information of bombs. How many of these witnesses of explosions do you imagine were published in the final report by NIST? None of them. And there's hundreds more to look at next month and when we get to the Twin Towers. Explosions like these heard on the afternoon by these firefighters.
Yeah, here's one of the guys. He can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
The afternoon of 9/11, but not even reported? Do we have enormous pyroclastic clouds of pulverized concrete and heat? Let's see. In fact, the Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigation, which is the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA 921, gives us some very specific guidelines on what to look for when we're investigating. It says the large volumes of gas and the large amount of heat released in chemical explosions cause rapidly expanding plumes of hot gases. Well, these plumes were observable before, during, and even after these events. As you can see, racing away from Building 7, 35 miles an hour in every direction, these rapidly expanding plumes, cauliflower-shaped, from these very, very hot gases. Well, there's a lot more heat here represented than the few small scattered fires that we saw earlier. Well, this is all direct evidence of explosive destruction. Next week, we'll look at some additional evidence, such as pools of molten iron and chemical evidence of thermite actually, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. All of that evidence found as well in the destruction of this building and the Twin Towers. It's direct evidence of explosive destruction. Fire can't create any one of them, let alone all 10 of them. 8 in so far that you've seen here. Fires like these at the World Trade Center Building 5, fully engulfing this building. If any of these World Trade Center buildings were going to come down due to fire, we'd expect it to be this one. Did it? No. Mid-rise and high-rise office buildings do not come down due to fire. Never have before 9/11, never have since 9/11. But on 9/11, we have not 1 or 2, but 3. Well, not even in China in 2009 with the Beijing Mandarin Hotel completely engulfed from top to bottom. In fact, let's take a look at it. Before and after. Before on the left, after on the right, slightly toasted around the edges, but still standing, being remodeled, put back into action. But these small, few scattered fires brought this building down in 6.5 seconds. Unlikely by themselves, very unlikely. Well, let's see what FEMA said. FEMA did an analysis early on, had $600,000 of funding. In fact, what did they find? The specifics of the fires in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. What? Unknown? Our best hypothesis, fire plus random damage and then complete collapse, has only a low probability of occurrence. Wait a minute. What do you do when your best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence? You go back and you find another hypothesis that has a higher probability of occurrence. They didn't do that, but what they did do is suggest that further research and investigation and analysis are needed to resolve the issue. But unfortunately for those hoping to resolve that issue, the evidence was illegally destroyed. This is a crime scene, and this is the illegal destruction of evidence. But it was an act of war. What made it that was the attack on the Pentagon, which was that third plane, or fourth. And so they weren't bound by the crime scene evidence regulations, restrictions, laws. 400 truckloads a day, in fact, were being hauled away from the Twin Towers to China for recycling. Within 2 weeks after 9/11, all the World Trade Center, well, the World Trade Center Building 7 steel was starting to be hauled away, prompting building fire engineering magazine's Bill Manning to cry out, in the magazine, crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing the astounding ignorance of a government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. But it didn't. What did the experts say? Well, here's Danny Jowenko, one of the top European controlled demolitions experts, probably the top. He has 27 years in the business. Now, somebody showed him a laptop, and on the laptop is Building 7 coming down, just as you saw earlier. And they didn't tell him when it happened or what it was, but they asked him to comment. He says it starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. Professional work, without a doubt. Well, then they said, well, did you know this came down on 9/11? And he's scratching his head, and he says, that's impossible. How could they have done a controlled demolition on 9/11? You can't do that in a day. So he says they must have worked very fast. I mean, he's just trying to make sense out of it. But it doesn't make sense unless they were pre-planned well before 9/11. which involves foreknowledge of the destruction, which we're going to look at now. As we watch these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion over their shoulder, looking straight into the CNN camera, and then saying what you hear.
Keep your eye on that building. It's coming down.
Building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys.
We are walking back. It's a building about to blow up. Hopefully, debris coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Now it's not just foreknowledge. We're talking about how do they know the building is about? Do fires blow up buildings? Well, listen to Kevin McPadden, who earlier has talked about all this evidence of explosions. But prior to that, he's saying this as he listens to the radio held in the hand of a Red Cross worker, because everybody's held back about 6 or more blocks away from this Building 7. They were told it was going to come down, which is interesting, or being brought down, according to some witnesses. But here's what Kevin McPadden hears on that radio.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What is going on here? Somebody knows what's going on, and the story changed. In fact, the BBC knew 20 minutes before it happened. They announced the unprecedented collapse of a 47-story skyscraper. They even give the reason. There it is, still, as Jane is announcing this, Jane Stanley, the building is standing right behind her. And they apologize for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. What, does this make them psychic? What is going on with the BBC? Well, better than that, CNN announces the collapse of this building at 11:07. Let's listen to this report.
In New York, Alan Dobbs Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Alan, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabg and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick white ash and building material.
So he's announcing the unprecedented collapse of a 50-story. There was no other 50-story building that collapsed that day. I mean, the Twin Towers had just come down 15 minutes or so earlier. And there were some damaged buildings, but no building completely collapsed like he described fairly lucidly there. What is going on here? Had this building come down at that time, we wouldn't even have videos of it because it would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud when the Twin Towers went down. So a lot of researchers suggest that it was supposed to go down at that time, that it was a dud, and that was the reason these mysterious construction workers were walking back into the building, that they were fixing a dud, that then they heard explosions, which can be prep explosions, before the final collapse of this building at 5:20 later that afternoon in front of God and everybody. So that's speculation, but with regard to the rest of what you've seen so far, is this hypothesis of controlled demolition corroborated to you? Do we have so far at least 8 out of the 10 key characteristics of explosive destruction? Can fire create any one of those? Is there additional supportive testimony and eyewitness and video support for the controlled demolition? Let me just ask you at this point, How many, three questions. How many of you believe the official story, and please be very honest, that the building came down by fires? How many of you are unsure? And how many of you at this point think that the building came down by controlled demolition? First of all, how many of you think the building came down by normal office fires according to NIST?
Zero.
Uh-oh. You're in trouble now. How many of you are unsure? You might still be unsure. There's always reason especially if this is your first exposure to this evidence. You admit you're unsure. How many?
One. Two.
Two. And how many of you think this building came down by controlled demolition?
Most everybody else.
45.
All right. So you can see what the problem is. I mean, this is a very highly secure building. We're not talking about probably. I mean, this is an assumption, right? Al-Qaeda probably didn't get into this building. I mean, who's in this building? This is the CIA's undercover operations for their whole New York station. The Secret Service operates out of one of these floors. The IRS is in there. The Department of Defense and Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management on the 23rd floor, a bunker designed to run the city in the event of a war or an earthquake or something. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which lost thousands of files that it was actively pursuing against cases like Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom and other businesses like that, which was on, by the way, the 12th floor where the worst fires were. So we certainly want an investigation of those fires. Who could have gained access to set these explosives? That's a key question. And we want an investigation, of course, that gets to who had not just access, but who had the motive, who had the means, who had the opportunity to set these explosives in this building. Those are all key questions that have to be answered. So we're asking everybody today to do something with this information. You can sign our petition online at AE 911 Truth and become a member of AE 911 Truth. You can donate. We're a 501c3 organization, so you get tax deduction. And volunteer with us. We need a lot of help, all different kinds of help. Right now we're setting up a tour through the Midwest, and we'd like to come to Cleveland and Cincinnati, and you can help us by calling our members in those cities and help us find the people who want to set up this tour through the whole Midwest. Just to let Chris know if you want to help. But to demand a new investigation and reach out to your elected representatives. Send them the AE911truth.org link. You can do this right from your own computer sitting at home. You can do it on your iPhone while you're at the beach, for that matter. Contact television, radio, newspapers. We do interviews everywhere. We've done 550 interviews, more than that many presentations in 38 countries and 95 American cities, to groups of 100 to 3,000. So we need to keep going, though, because most people are not as tuned in as this group to which we are speaking now. That's for sure. So screen the DVDs. Speak to new audiences. I mean, you can get our DVD online for free at YouTube and show it to your friends. Invite them over. Show them our latest DVD, which I'm going to show you in a second. The 9/11, not the latest, but the most popular 9/11 explosive evidence experts speak out. Regarding our effort to educate the professional community in engineering and architecture, we have hired the University of Alaska to engage in a 2-year dynamic computer analysis. And this forensic structural engineer, Leroy Halsey, is is on it. He's one of the top people in the country. So we're very excited about that effort and encourage you to support it and become aware. You can be on our mailing list even without signing a petition, by the way. Just go to the website, ae911truth.org, and you'll get in our inbox after you sign up for the email newsletter or the news updates. The latest efforts we're making toward a real investigation, the latest evidence that's coming out. In fact, you'll get a PDF of this 50-page booklet, which includes evidence not just for Building 7, but the Twin Towers, and direct refutation of all of the key assertions made by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So be sure to avail yourself of this resource coming to you free in your email inbox. And be aware that we've made a film, a documentary about this, and I'm going to play you a couple of minute long trailer here.
Conspiracy theories, I know there are lots of them. They can go on. We can speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came down.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
So all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
NIST excluded the documents from FEMA and Appendix C that documented the evidence of melting steel.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
There were these iron microspheres present in all of the dust samples. They needed to have been formed in extremely high temperatures.
All the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved.
In the dust, what we had found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite.
NIST concedes that they found no evidence for explosives. So then we asked them, well, did you look? And they said, no, we did not look for explosives or residues of explosives.
And in fact, the evidence is overwhelming that these red-grade crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries.
And we have watched as scientific integrity has been undermined, and scientific research politicized in an effort to advance predetermined ideological agendas.
If this is a crime, I think everybody agrees it's a crime. Evidence was removed from the scene of the crime. You can't do science when you are deprived of the evidence and when your hypothesis is the least valid instead of the most likely. And the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned. This is not science.
So the 60-minute version of this film is on YouTube. The 90-minute version is available on our website, ae911truth.org, in the section of our website called What You Can Do is what it's called. We've also made another film, and this is the film we're touring in the Southeast U.S. starting in 2 weeks. But in the first 2 weeks of July, we'll be touring through the Midwest. And that's where we need your help in Ohio. And it's called Firefighters, Architects, and Engineers Expose 9/11 Myths, where I teamed up with Eric Lawyer, who founded Firefighters for 9/11 Truth and Unity. They have 200 firefighters calling for a new investigation. And what Eric and I do here is bust about 20 myths of 9/11, one by one. Myths put out by our government, by the media, and myths commonly held by other people. We've just finished our Northwest tour of 13 cities. And so at this point, I'll bet you guys have some questions. Let's see what they are. Who's got the first question?
Now, Mr. Gage, first of all, are you able to see me right now? Is my video on?
I can see the class, but not you.
Oh, okay.
There you are.
Before we get into the question, I know you mentioned donations on your website. You're a 501c3, so they're tax deductible. But we have a donation bucket here that we're going to pass around. So we'll pass the hat for you, and then we'll send that your way.
Thank you. That's very helpful. We do our best to stay in the black, which means above the red, which means we're not always successful in doing that. And so every piece of support financially enables us to do lots of work, like this presentation, for instance.
Okay. So now why don't we open it up to the floor for questions? Yes, Siobhan.
Why would they implode Building 7? What would be the purpose for that?
Well, we can speculate about that, actually. Some people think that the operation was planned on the 23rd floor. I don't know myself. The 23rd floor was the bunker that Giuliani had to run the city in the event of a hurricane. That's one theory. Another theory is that actually this building was supposed to have been hit by the plane that went down in Shanksville in Pennsylvania. And we don't know if that's true or not, but if it were, and like the Twin Towers, which you'll see next month when we come back, the planes hitting the towers aren't enough to bring them down. And so one would need controlled demolition. So perhaps that's what happened with Building 7, where we had no plane, but we're going to bring the building down anyway. That might have been what happened.
Okay, next question. Yeah, Chuck.
I want to thank you about all the work you've done.
Thank you.
About this. I have a DVD here called After the Tribulation. When I bought this, I was going to study the tribulation in the Bible. But when I got to the 2-minute and 43-second mark, there was Trade Tower 7 going down, complete with yellow flashes coming out of the windows. I have it right here. And I'm wondering, I've been sitting on this for about a year because I didn't know what to say about it. I've never seen Trade Tower 7 going down with flashes in the windows. Explosive flashes. I contacted Mr. Steele, Andrew Steele, and I told him about it from your organization. And he actually produced this on YouTube or one of them. He described the cover to me, showing the buildings and meteorites coming down all around the buildings. And so he gave me a cell phone. I called him back about a week later, got him. He said that they're still looking at it. I was wondering if you had seen these flashes going on.
There is a video that was put out where the flashes were faked in it. And to ensure that this particular video maker was clear about his deception, he reversed the building. So it's actually mirrored such that the east penthouse is on the incorrect side of the building. That's the easiest way to see the mirroring. And he joked about all of this, and it did fool some people. We've been reporting it as a fake ever since it came out.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Why would they want to do, how would they, it doesn't make any sense trying to put flashes in there that would prove our side of it.
Well, there's some people that don't believe and can't believe and won't believe that the towers were brought down by controlled demolition on purpose in some sort of an inside operation. So they mock the 9/11 truth movement. They call us conspiracy theorists, and they like to try to prove how gullible some of us can be. And so this was, I believe, one attempt to do just that. And in fact, he admitted this in a subsequent video, and I don't know the name of that offhand.
Okay, thanks for the info.
Sure.
Fred?
There are other people, by the way, who know exactly what's going on, and they're paid to put out disinformation. And this could be an example of that as well. We just don't really know.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Fred Bender, and I just wondered, you mentioned Dan Rather and the media. Have you ever heard of the Council on Foreign Relations?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, then you understand these people, they're not going to report, they're going to not report it right. They control, 90% of the media on top belong to the Council of Foreign Relations. They want their one world government, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, and those type of people are behind it. And so you're not going to get it through the media, as far as I'm concerned. I've been with the John Birch Society for 50-some years. So, but thank you for your talk, but if you would comment on that, since you know something about the Council of Foreign Relations, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and nobody's been all over this for longer than the John Birch Society. And they're all over 9/11 truth as well. And so regarding the media, yes, 90% of the mainstream media is owned by just 6 corporations. And there is a think tank in California at Sonoma State University that called Project Censor, which documents who owns and operates those 6 corporations. And it turns out to be the same companies and boards of directors that are interlocking that own and operate the companies in the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, all of whom profited enormously from 9/11. So there's lots of reasons, you're right, that we have not been able to get our story into the mainstream media. Nevertheless, we have had a few curious, successful entrees therein. Geraldo Rivera on Fox News had one of our engineers and family members calling for a new investigation, showing Building 7 coming down. In fact, Geraldo even acknowledged the work of the 1,350 architects and engineers we had at the time in 2009. More recently, we were on C-SPAN in the Washington Journal program, being interviewed for 45 minutes. And it became their most popular, most watched video ever. I mean, this is the program that interviews all of the senators and the congressmen and President Obama himself. So we did very well, but they haven't invited us back for some reason.
Okay, a question from Mr. Gressler here.
Thank you. You said before that only like a select group or company or specialist could have taken down a building. Is there any working theories right now over like what group could have been responsible for it, and maybe investigate, you know, if there's anybody within the company maybe who's, you know, just trying to investigate further into, I don't know the names of any demolition teams, but you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, we don't really know. There's certainly a lot of suspicion placed on Controlled Demolition, Inc. I don't know that there's any more reason to suspect them than others, other than the fact that they did have the cleanup contract for hauling all this stuff out of the World Trade Center site, at least one of the major cleanup contracts. So who knows what their culpability was, but somebody obviously had unlimited access to the largest controlled demolition, to perform the largest controlled demolition in the world, which would be quite a feather in your cap if you weren't simultaneously murdering 3,000 people, who were, by the way, a third of which were completely vaporized. They couldn't even find a piece big enough to fit into a test tube, although they found 6,000 of such sized pieces. So we've got to have a real investigation as to who could have gotten access to the Twin Towers, which we'll see next month, the evidence for that. But we certainly want an investigation of ACE Elevator, who had the contract to modernize these elevators in the core of the building the 9 months prior to 9/11, which would have given them complete access to the or immediate access, at least, to the core columns and beams in the building where these charges were most probably placed.
Okay, question for Mr. Macko.
There were reports that on the day of the explosions, people, especially in government agencies, did not show up for work. Do you have any comments on that first? And second, would you care to comment on Larry Silverstein and his insurance issues regarding the buildings?
I don't know what workers were not showing up. There are some suggestions and some research, I guess, that shows that there are certain Israelis that didn't show up for work, but I haven't done that research. I can't back it up. There are others who have, I think, Christopher Bolin is one of them, bolin.com, BOLLYN.com. Regarding Silverstein, let's introduce you guys to Larry Silverstein. I'll share my screen once again. I do have a slide on him because he's an interesting character. Mr. Silverstein, oh, I don't have it here. I'll have to hunt for it just a little bit. He owned the World Trade Center prior to 9/11. Just 6 weeks prior to 9/11 is when this deal went through, and he was interviewed, which is interesting in and of itself, right? But he did place a massive amount of terrorist insurance, which is the first time in history terrorist insurance has been placed on a building, as far as I understand. And he came away with $5.68 billion after investing only $125 million of his own money. And he then had the right to develop and own the rest of the structure, because it was no longer owned by the Port Authority. But he had the 99-year lease is what he purchased, actually. So let's listen to him having been recorded a month after 9/11. Well, October 2002 was a year on America Rebuilds, a program on the PBS station.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
What did you just hear Larry Silverstein say? Well, this is a term used in the controlled demolition industry. He says later, well, I meant pull the firemen out of the building. Well, you don't refer to firemen as it. And the firemen weren't in the building. They were told not to fight the fire. They didn't have adequate pressure in the water. But beside the point, they were pulled out of the building like way before this decision was made, because they were told it was going to come down, that it had structural issues, that it wasn't safe to fight the fire. So he's obviously lying. So this is very interesting. Any more questions about Larry while I have him up on the screen?
Has he ever been questioned by the federal department, FBI?
That's a great question. He certainly needs to be, but I don't think he was. Nor were all those witnesses that heard explosions that NIST did not report. And there are hundreds of them, by the way. We'll show you dozens more next month.
Mr. Gage, I'm on the video right now.
Hi.
Hi. Dave Black, I've been following you for a long time. I've even sent you a few emails 8 years ago when you first started this. Really appreciate all the work you're doing. You know, many of us feel that we're never going to get a resolution here because the government's buried this for 15 years. But one of the great things I still find from you keeping this alive, even if this never gets resolved, is the awareness that false flags could be occurring. My question to you is there any possibility there could have been a false flag either in the Boston bombing, the Colorado movie theater shooting, or the San Bernardino shootings? Thanks.
Well, you left out Sandy Hook, and you left out the 7/7 bombing in London and in Spain. And according to many researchers, and I am not among them, they believe all of these are false flag operations designed not just to terrorize the public, but to encourage us to let go of our long-held grip on the Second Amendment, which our forefathers included for some very specific reasons, so that the government would fear the people rather than the people fearing the government. So that gives you a sense of, there's a sense of my political views that got out inadvertently. And thank you for the support on that. I understand that this particular group has a very strong presence on campus, and I know you want to be stronger, but it is an incredible start to wake people up that our civil liberties are under attack. The Bill of Rights is under attack. The Constitution itself is under attack. And there will be other false flag attacks on Americans and on America, according to many researchers and people who are connecting the dots, so that the agenda which is in place can move forward at a quicker pace. I don't research these issues. I know many of you do, and I encourage you to discuss these further after I'm off the air. I have to maintain a strong, narrow focus on the scientific evidence at the World Trade Center, because we do receive a lot of criticism when we veer from our area of credibility. And to the extent that we stay in that area of credibility, which is science and technical matters and eyewitness testimony and video testimony, we are a lot more effective, and we can be used more effectively by you when you're presenting our case to others. And indeed, as I mentioned, this recording is on YouTube so that you can use it to play to others. But also there's a 15-minute documentary, which I didn't mention, on just Building 7, narrated by actor Ed Asner. And most of this evidence is condensed into that 15 minutes, really well done. And that is at a website called architects-engineers.org. And I'll ask Chris to send that to you guys too.
All right, Elliot?
Yeah, you probably heard of the former governor of Minnesota who did some of his investigation in that. And one of the things that was surprising is when he wanted to go see the steel and test the steel, he was refused access to the building that was totally locked down and guarded. He went to see. Had you seen that show that he did?
Yeah, Jesse Ventura. I've seen all of it.
Right, and he was refused. He went to see the head who was keeping this building under lock and key, that he says is more secure than most other buildings that he's ever seen. And anything else ever come out of that you're aware of?
No, not that I'm aware of, but there's many of these monuments that have been constructed around the world, and I've seen a dozen of them, and they all have most all of them have very interesting cuts that are not oxyacetylene cuts. Next month, we'll look at some of those when we examine the evidence of thermite destruction on this webinar with you. When is the date of that, Chris?
We'll have to talk and figure out a date for that, but I would say mid-June or early to mid-June.
Sounds great.
All right, and now Mr. Rustan.
I've got kind of a three-part question. I'll try to make it succinct and make sense. First, I assume you're familiar with the term dustification, I hope. And second, I'm wondering if thermite was used in the Twin Towers, would that explain all the concrete that turned to dust? And then third, if there was no thermite involved, how is there a possible way to explain all the dust created instantly?
Well, let's take a look at it. I'll share my screen with you again. We're referring here to one of the alternative theories, which in this case is often called directed energy weapons, because some people suggest because there was so much dust and because the steel was displaced across a vast area of ground zero, that the steel itself was turned to dust. We don't believe that. The concrete certainly was turned to powder. And what we're talking about, and we'll see next month, mid-June, is that 90,000 tons of concrete flooring in each of these buildings, because there's 110 floors. Each of them are an acre in size. And they're missing. They're not stacked up at the bottom. There's only a two-story pile of core columns, perimeter columns, etc. So one of the key proponents of this theory is Judy Wood. And one of the things that she and others are suggesting is that there weren't actual planes that hit the towers. So let's just look at this as well, although you didn't ask about it. It's really important. It's in the mind of a lot of people. What you can see here is that the plane is not a cookie cutter shape. The hole. You see rectangular sections across here where aluminum panels were destroyed. But as we'll see next month, the towers were placed in sections pre-welded of 3 verticals, like this one here, 3 verticals and 3 horizontals. Here's a horizontal. There's another horizontal here that was damaged by the plane, and then down here. And then those are bolted together. So what you see here is the plane has impacted the building and pushed these panels in upon impact, breaking the bolts. There's only 4 5/8" round bolts connecting these vertical sections to each other. So that's what we're seeing. And NIST has actually documented this fairly carefully. It's one of the few things that they did right. And so even where the wingtips are up here, you don't have this severing of the columns because there's not enough mass in the wingtip to do that. But you do have, of course, the damaging of the outer aluminum cladding. So I wanted to make that very clear. And here's a more precise detailing of the damage. Now, this is one of the things that NIST did a whole lot of study on. What they did not do is do any analysis on the collapse itself, because their entire $20 million effort with 14,000 pages stops at the initiation of collapse. We'll discuss that next month. But what they do find, and which we'll see next month also, is nanothermite red gray chips and the iron microspheres, which is evidence of thermitic destruction. And Judy Wood, in her book, Where Did the Towers Go?, denies the evidence that you'll see next month in abundance of this material, which should not be found in the World Trade Center dust. This is evidence of unignited nanothermite. The spheres themselves, 10,000 tons of them probably altogether found, and 10,000 tons up to that much of the unignited. This is all evidence of thermite residue, which Judy Wood denies. She denies the evidence of hot molten iron with liquid molten iron flowing out of the jaws, the material in the jaws of this crab claw. It's also flowing out of the tower 10 minutes prior to its collapse. This hot molten material is documented by Bechtel, 2,800 degrees. She denies the evidence of explosions. You'll see dozens of witnesses next month. So, so we're talking about, she believes that the steel has been turned to dust. Well, it's not. It's distributed laterally in freely flying structural steel sections, which we'll document next month, well beyond the boundary of ground zero. And that's where it's found. It's a very explosive event compared to the very implosive event, the implosion of Building 7, as you can see on the right here. So, and one of the other things that she talks about are the curious destruction of World Trade Center 6 and a little piece here in this World Trade Center building that are obvious evidence of internal implosions, but not a complete implosion of the building. So you can see the massive amounts of structural debris that hit this building, but also there's evidence of explosions in Building 6, even before the towers came down. So this is one of the other pieces of phenomena that she describes. The spire, which is in existence a few seconds after the tower goes down, as you can see here in the video, then what happens is an explosion which shakes the dust off of this vertical spire, and then you can clearly see the top of it going down in this view. It doesn't turn to dust as is claimed, and you can watch it yourself. She's saying the whole thing goes poof and is turned to dust, but what you see is it's going straight down. See the top of it descending all the way through. And so I think this is very important to point out to people. There's no dust. There's no dustified steel accounted for in the very detailed chemical analysis of the dust. There are iron microspheres, which are elemental iron, which is the byproduct of thermite, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. But there's no dustified steel. I hope that helps.
Okay, and a question from Fred Deming.
Yeah, Mr. Gage, I want to thank you for your work that you're doing and how far you're stepping out of the box. Because I think this is the biggest problem that we're facing is people won't step out of the box. On your petitions, I was curious as to how far you have gotten, if you have submitted anything, and if you intend to submit it to Congress.
When we had 1,000 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth calling for a new investigation, we submitted that petition along with the DVD 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, the Architecture of Destruction. All 435 of them and the President of the United States got the DVD. We did it again when we had 2,000, and we'll do it again when we have 3,000. So it's a huge expense and a big effort, and we visited with dozens of congresspersons and their staffers, and we're going to continue until we actually break through and get some response.
Okay, I'd like to comment on that. I'm the local chapter leader of the John Birch Society here. I've been in 16 years. And I'm sure you're aware that they can thwart an investigation at any level. If we just look at what's going on with Hillary and all her shenanigans. But we've been talking in our group. If you want to talk about this personally, I would call you. I think you would have better luck contacting the families and then going to each local sheriff where people were, where they lived in their hometown, including New York, because they were absolutely murdered. And this is a criminal investigation, and the sheriff will have no choice but to investigate. And he cannot be sidestepped.
Well, the sheriff has been approached by a New Jersey attorney, David. Forgot his name. It'll come to me. And the New Jersey widows have signed our petition. The Jersey girls and others. We have also sent 10,000 police chiefs throughout the United States our evidence. We actually faxed it to all of them. There's a number of these types of efforts that have been made. And I can assure you that police chiefs will point the finger and say this is a federal issue. And we end up getting nowhere with most of the efforts we make that we would imagine they would have no choice but to follow up on. So, but we're not quitting, certainly. So I would be happy to talk to you about that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. McMurray.
I was wondering if you could maybe talk about the Pentagon, because just like Building 7, that seems like something that gets swept under the rug, and talking about how the initial explosion was only a small hole, and then just the whole Pentagon in itself too, about position of where it got hit was also under investigation for, loss of money. So I wonder your thoughts about that.
Yeah, we all want an investigation of the Pentagon too. There's clearly a cover-up going on. The evidence for the Pentagon is actually very confusing to the 9/11 truth movement. That is to say, we're very divided on what that evidence shows or means or how best to interpret it. We all agree that nothing should have hit the most highly defended building in the world, that they're hiding dozens of very high-res videos that would show exactly what did or did not hit the Pentagon. We all agree that Hani Hanjour, who failed Cessna flying school, could not have done the 270-degree maneuver flying around the Pentagon, dropping 3,000 feet per minute in a descending corkscrew that doesn't hit Donald Rumsfeld's office, the most easy target to maneuver a plane down into through the large roof structure, but ends up hitting the naval intelligence section and civilian auditors that are looking for the $2.3 trillion that Donald Rumsfeld was forced into announcing was missing from the Pentagon budget. That announcement made just the day before 9/11.
So what do you think hit the Pentagon?
I don't know what hit the Pentagon. There's a lot of competing theories. It's been enough just for us to focus on the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers, but we're certainly in support of a new investigation.
All right, David.
Hi, I'm David Kajanori. I heard in newspapers and Facebook all over for the last couple of weeks. Looks like the GOP they came out and some other Democrats were willing to come to the investigation. They look like it says that Saudi was responsible for it. And I heard when Obama was down in Saudi, the Saudi king told Obama, he said, I don't like the way your government's coming after me. He said, if Congress proposed that we're responsible, we will take the money, anything that you guys possess in Saudi. I heard that it was like a big fight about this for the last couple of weeks. No, I heard from the media and Facebook.
Yeah, and so
you hear about this?
Oh yeah, it's very important. There's different thinking on this issue as well within the 9/11 truth movement. There are 28 redacted pages that were illegally redacted by the Bush administration from the original 9/11 congressional hearings. They seem to indicate by the 30 or so co-sponsors of the legislation to force Obama to release these redactions. They said that what they read in those 28 pages changed their whole understanding of what happened on 9/11. They say that Saudis are implicated, the government itself, government officials, implicated in funding these terrorists. So yeah, that would give some more light. Some suggest that it supports the official story more than pulls the rug from it, and that it may be some sort of a diversion or transfer of blame or effort to finger the Saudis instead of the real perpetrators who actually placed explosives in, for instance, in the World Trade Center. I myself think that uncovering this ball of yarn will end up rolling back to the Bush administration, and who flew Saudis, including members of the Bin Laden family, out of the United States on 9/11 itself. So yeah, let the chips fall where they may. And even if that means that the Saudis sell their U.S. Treasury notes and that ruins our economy, I say that let the truth be known and let the chips fall where they may.
Amen. That Saudi is responsible. I want to know, is it true that Saudi did it, or it's confusing because a lot of people say it wasn't Saudi. Because the Bush administration, they had a big relationship with Saudi. They keep saying that Saudi was our ally. So really, did Saudi did it to us, even if they were our allies?
Okay, I only heard about 50% of that. I'm going to have to ask you to slow down and speak up.
I said, is it true that Saudi is responsible for this act? But the problem is most politicians won't admit it to it because some of them have a good relationship with Saudis. The Clintons, the Obamas, the Bushes, Cheney, the Reagans, they all got along with their Saudis. But the problem is Saudis are allies. But is it true that Saudi did this kind of bad act, even if they're allies? But the problem is if we speak the truth about them, they're going to hate us. So I really want to know if they did it or not.
Well, they seem to be implicated in the funding of the terrorists. That's all we know. I mean, and that's all that's implied. We don't think there's, I mean, it would, I mean, do you think that the Saudis got into the towers to plant explosives without inside help?
No.
I don't either.
So you're saying the Saudi king funded all this money?
I can't hear you.
Is it true that, so if you say Saudi fund all these terrorist money, so that comes from the king family, right?
I don't know the details of where it comes from.
Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Gage, so first of all, we want to thank you all very much because we have to wrap up. Last time we got out late, we kind of got yelled at, so we want to get out on time tonight. So let's all give Mr. Gage a round of applause.
Appreciate that very much. It's been a joy to talk to you. Look forward to getting back in mid-June, and hopefully I'll have my voice back and I won't have a cold and so forth.
And Mr. Gage, if you will, I just have one last question for you.
Sure.
What have you noticed in your efforts has been the most successful tactic that you guys have taken? And also, just briefly, why is 9/11 truth so important?
9/11, as you saw today, nobody believed the official story anymore about how this building came down by office fires. Everybody, with one person who was unsure, agreed that Building 7 is an obvious controlled demolition. That makes it the smoking gun of 9/11. So we start with Building 7. Next month, you'll see the Twin Towers, the evidence there is even more clear than Building 7. When you have that as a base, you realize that 9/11 was an inside job. The fact that 9/11 was some sort of an inside operation, a black operation, a false flag operation, implies that we have a government that has been taken over by psychopaths who are murdering not just 3,000 people and 7,000 U.S. soldiers, but 2 million Iraqis and Afghanis in order to fulfill objectives in the Middle East that we don't all support. I can assure you of that. And that they're using lies and deceit and murder and treason in order to facilitate their objectives. That's the reason 9/11 has to be exposed, because it exposes the entire network that goes all the way back to the assassination of JFK, for those researchers who are on top of that. And that may lead to the next one if we don't expose this one. We've been warned, promised actually by the Bush administration, Cheney, members of Congress, members of the media, that the next terrorist attack could be a smoking gun. I mean, a mushroom cloud. So we're really quite concerned about what they've got up their sleeve, and they need to be exposed and held accountable, and we need our country back.
All right, Mr. Gage. So we thank you very much for spending this very valuable time with us. And I know we're going to continue to pray for you, and we wish you the best. And we just thank you very much for what you're doing. So if you have any closing words, feel free.
Yeah, do something, everybody. Don't just sit on this information. Send the AE911truth.org link to every architect and engineer that you can find and everybody else that you know. Our country is at stake here. Thanks again.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Gage.
Thank you, guys.